Right, ladies and gentlemen, we have still a fairly full agenda this evening, so I hope that we will be able to get through it with reasonable dispatch. Now, there is no fire drill scheduled this evening, so if the fire alarm does go off, it's probably due to the fact that the circuitry is overheated in the excitement of the meeting. In the case it does go off, the Democratic Services Officer, Mr Bailey, will find the way out for us and hopefully he'll come back and tell us where it is. And we will then exit the building. Now, as everyone will know, the Council usually manages to record a webcast and also produces a live webcast of its meetings. Now, can I ask whether anyone else is intending to record this meeting this evening? That's not to stop anyone, it's just so we know. No? Thank you very much. Now, just a brief word about protocol. We have a lot of speakers on one particular application, and there is also another controversial application later on. Feelings often run high on planning applications, not just amongst members of the public, but also amongst councillors and even occasionally officers. So I would ask people to respect opposing points of view, not to boo, not to jeer, not to cheer or wave banners, if only because that will significantly slow down the meeting. And on the first application, we have a significant number of speakers from parish councils and the public. So, if there is any serious infringement, the meeting will be adjourned whilst the public leave, other than the people who are on the agenda as speakers, who will obviously allow to remain. Now, we turn to the agenda this evening. First of all, apologies for absence.
Councillor Michael Hemsley.
Thank you. Item 2, notification of substitute members. I don't see anyone, so I'm assuming there aren't any. Item 3, notification of visiting members. I'll start with Councillor Newton. What item are you here for? Sorry. Right.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'm here for item 14, Bearsted Football Club. Thank you.
Councillor Firma.
Councillor Firma, item 11.
Thank you. Councillor Grigg.
Councillor Grigg, item 11.
Councillor Mortimer, Brian Mortimer, that is.
Item 11, Chairman. Thank you.
And Councillor Mrs Springett.
Item 13.
Thank you very much. Councillor Richard Webb, I'm sorry I didn't see you right at the end there.
Item 11 as well.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Item 4, items withdrawn from the agenda. Are there any? No items withdrawn from the agenda this evening. Item 5, urgent items. We have obviously the urgent update report, which appears on the agenda twice for this evening. We have urgent items and an item 6, urgent items. So I think that's a duplicate. It's agreed we take the urgent update reports this evening, members. Thank you very much. Item 6 is a duplicate, as I said. Item 7, disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures? Thank you very much. Item 8, disclosures of lobbying we will take with the applications when we reach them at the time. Item 9, to consider whether the item should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. I'm not aware of any exempt information this evening, so I propose to take all the items in public. Is that agreed, members? Thank you. Item 10, we do have a petition, and there is a speaker who is representing the petitioners. Obviously, as that relates to an item on the agenda for determination, we will take that with the planning application in question. I don't believe there are any other petitions. No, thank you very much. So that leads us on, without further ado, to item 11, land south of Forstall Lane, Coxheath, Kent, and I ask the officer to introduce the application. Phone appears to be a claim.
There we are.
Got it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of procedural matters to update members and members of the public tonight. Obviously, you may see quite a number of reference to different numbers in terms of the allocation. Obviously, members will be aware that at SPS&T on Tuesday night, SPS&T resolved to move the local plan forward up to full council on the 27th of September. So, in effect, what that does is that SPS&T have accepted the modifications by the inspector, and therefore, say for instance on this slide you'll see H160 is now policy H158 as modified by the Maidstone draft local plan. So that's just a point of context, and that will go through some of the development management policies where they change, so it's just for members' information. Obviously some members have their copy of the Reg 19, and that's why the policies changed slightly as approved by SPS&T. In terms of some other matters, I'd just like to go through. Obviously, the Chairman has raised the issue of the seen and the unseen urgent update papers. If I could just refer you to the previously unseen papers, you will note that there is a recommendation to remove some ahead from the previous recommendations of the travel plan to be dealt with by condition. And there's also a change to Condition 21. So I think it's only fair that I point out the reasons why that change has occurred. It's not a change that Kent Highways have requested. You'll notice on the unseen papers there is a condition that Kent Highways requested. Now, for the sake of consistency with the adjoining site to the south, which had a similar worded condition, and to meet the relevant 6 tests, I have changed that, or recommended that that condition being changed on Condition 1. So I think it's only fair to Kent Highways that I point that out at this stage, and they can obviously comment on that as we move through the report and the presentation. And you'll also note there's some changes to the heads in terms of contributions in terms of seal compliance testing. So my colleague, the legal officer, at the end of my presentation has just a couple of comments to make regarding some requests for delegated authority. I'll leave that to him at the end of the presentation, so if we could just make sure before we go to the speakers that my colleague has an opportunity to address that point. So we turn to the application. Site H158 as modified. This is an outline application for residential development of up to 210 dwellings, together with access off Forstall Lane. It includes 1.85 hectares of open space and associated infrastructure, and only access is being considered at this stage, with all other matters reserved for future consideration. So just taking you to the site in context, this is the application site. You've got the public right-of-way that runs down here. You've got the site down to the south, which is Willows Grange, in terms of which is Countryside Properties. You've got Forstall Lane here. You've got the access, which is proposed to be in approximately this position here. And you've got, and I'll go through some of the highway requirements which are covered in the condition and will be dealt with under Section 278 of the Highways Act, which do some road widening to Forstall Lane and also provide a dedicated footpath linking up to Mill Lane, looking to the west over here, which is just off plan. So just gives you some context of the village. Most members will know it particularly well. You've got the Countryside site here, you've got Heath Road, Stockett Lane, Forstall Lane, access to the site in this position here. Public right-of-way runs to the eastern boundary, and you've got well-established hedgerows around most of the boundary perimeters. You've got Coxheath School, primary school in this location, and some of the main services in the town centre here. And just to advise members in terms of the comments from the local plan inspector who addressed the issue of Coxheath, the larger village, in his report. Looking at the site in slightly closer detail, so this is the application site here, access proposed up the top, and you've got the existing residential properties off to the west here and to the south. I'll show you a slide in terms of this housing development is moving forward at quite a rate, and it's got its principal spine open space down the central area. And again, you'll see this application on its parameter plan proposes the open space, and I said that's indicative at this stage, off to this eastern boundary. There have been ecology issues pointed out in terms of badgers. I'm not going to point out exactly where their sets are, but they're located approximately along the eastern and also to the southern boundaries of the site, and due to confidentiality reasons, I won't point those out exactly where they are. So, moving on to the photographs, this is looking along Forstall Lane. So this is where the road becomes quite countrified. You've got the hedgerows either side, you've got the application on the right-hand side of the photograph, application site over the other side of the hedgerow, and you've got the access quite a way back behind the photographer. This is looking in the opposite direction, so this is looking west with the application. This is the hedgerows that line that existing boundary. You've got the site entrance. I'll show you that a bit more in a prose in approximately this position here. And this just gives you sort of an extent of the existing width. I'll just point out that the verges, as you see on this photograph, are within Highways land and within Highways control. So along this road, the road is proposed to be widened to 4.8 metres along the length of the lane. It will be widened to 5.5 metres in the vicinity of the new access. There will be an extension of the existing 30 miles an hour speed limit to cover the development, and there is proposed a 1.8 metre wide footway linking up to Mill Lane from the site access. So that links up with the existing pedestrian access that's already on Mill Lane. And these matters are all covered out by a proposed condition which will deal with a 278 agreement under the Highways Act, and that's what I've referred to you in the urgent update report. So in terms of access points, this is a closer view. The access point sits just behind where you've got these gated piers, sits in approximately this position here, and would require that removal of that existing hedgerow, with the remaining hedgerow to be retained. Moving within the site, and obviously as you go down to the end, you've obviously got Stockett Lane, and there are proposals, as I'll come to show you, for improvements to Stockett Lane in terms of visibility. So this is looking towards the western existing estate. So you've got the boundary hedging here. You've got the proposed access up here in approximately this location here, so this boundary hedging would be retained, and then access would come into this site, and this is the existing housing estate and development. So the photographs will move in an anti-clockwise direction, sort of moving off to the left of the picture and spanning over to the southern aspect to show where the parameter plan shows the open space area. So it just shows moving over, and I would just point out to members, obviously, if you probably know the site quite well, it's quite undulating. There are clear views, quite substantial views over to the North Downs, quite dramatic views, but they're, I wouldn't say in terms of significant level changes, but when you're walking on site and you walk into some of the bumps and the mounds that were on the site, you can see that there's quite a difference between the lowest level on the application site and where the houses are currently being built in these houses. So there is quite a difference in terms of level changes between the highest and the lowest point on the site. You'll see that as we move through the photographs. And again, this is looking southwest towards the existing estate. You can just start to come into view in terms of the Willow Grange development, which is the countryside development off here. And obviously what is proposed on the parameters plan is this area over here to be proposed for open space. Again, you can see how the land lies. It becomes quite a dip. And in terms of principles, the Willow Grange scheme here has its principal open space almost in the centre of the site, and that proposes over in this location, and that kind of links in with what the application is proposing here, albeit in parameter detail. So over here you've got the eastern boundary, you've got the public right-of-way, and you've got sort of quite sensitive ecology matters along this boundary and along this boundary along here. And again, this is looking, again, south towards the new estate, and just over, which shows looking south, and that's in the area, in the rough area where the parameter plan shows the open space. Moving on to the master plan, as I said, the only consideration currently members are considering is access. That's denoted by the red arrow in here. So you're not considering layout, scale, landscaping within this application. You're considering the principal point of access and obviously the works to Forstall Lane. This shows, in terms of the green, shows the public rights of way. As I've referred to, the indicative open space area, and part of the reasons for that is to give a softer edge to the development over here for ecology matters, and would also incorporate such schemes within that open space area. In terms of an open space provision, that provides approximately 1.85, and that's part of the application which is proposed to be provided. So it's above the policy allocation, with a landscape buffer of 0.59 hectares, with an overall site area of 7.79 hectares. The yellow arrows indicate pedestrian access points into the development, and would necessitate the very small removal of existing hedgerows in these points here to allow pedestrian access and permeability through the sites. So we have a green infrastructure plan, in terms of which shows the parameter of the public open space, and in terms of the developable area in this area here. We've got the land use parameters. I previously set out approximately what they are, with the buffer boundaries of 0.59. I've referred to the open space area, the resi development, which includes 5.35 hectares against an overall site area of 7.79. So this gives you a scale parameter. And as I said, this is purely indicative. What it sets a scale of no more maximum height limit of 12 metres, which is approximately between 2 and 2.5 stories. You'll note within the conditions, suggested conditions, that the officer hasn't considered it necessary to set those parameters as the outline permission. Obviously, members have the option, if they consider it necessary to do so. That is an option they have available to them on this application. We then turn into the plan access parameter plan, and I'm not going to go through that. That effectively shows the principles of access. Again, principal point of access, pedestrian access, public right-of-way as existing, which connects the site. And then, in terms of turning lastly to the transport improvements, I have gone through, in terms of what the transport improvements comprise. They are set out in quite detail in the report, but just to talk members through, very briefly, you've got Stockett Lane in terms of here, you've got Forstall Lane, so there are improvements to the junction in terms of visibility. I'm sure members will ask Kent Highways in more detail on those issues as we move forward. You've got a widening of the carriageway to 4.8 metres along this length. You've got the introduction of a footway in terms of, in this plan, between the site access on the southern side, Forstall Lane, between the proposed access and Mill Lane. You've got a widening of the road around this particular point to approximately 5.5 metres to allow turning facilities, and obviously within this plan you've got diagrams to show how HGVs and alternatives can access into the site at this junction of Stockett Lane / Forstall Lane. The application has been accompanied by a detailed transport assessment, has been undertaken by a road safety audit, which has been reviewed by KCC Highways, and you will note the comments from KCC Highways the details aren't set out in the report, but you've obviously got the highways officer here tonight. So in terms of the improvements, and I'll just point out, in terms of concern being raised about a right turn to Wells Street as you go effectively down Forstall Lane and then go up in terms of Wells Street, there has been a junction design at this particular point which effectively is designed to deter a right-hand turn down Forstall Lane and goes into Wells Lane, and it's geared to make you turning left over this particular point. I'm sure you might want to ask Kent Highways about that particular design feature. Again, that is set out in the condition and proposed to be secured by the 278 agreement. So, turning to the principles of the application, I won't be much longer, Mr. Chairman. In terms of the principles of the application, they are set out in the report. Members will be aware that officers are attaching very significant weight, almost full weight, to the emerging local plan. You've got a spatial policy for Coxheath, which is set out in policy SP13, which allocates this site for 195 units. You've got a specific policy, which is now H158, formerly H160, which allocates this site. It does set out an approximate density for this site, and as I previously said to members, those densities in the local plan are set out as indicative figures, with the preamble to the policy requiring the individual application to assess the actual the appropriate densities for the site. So this one is seeking to achieve 210, and the officer's report sets out that that is capable of accommodated on site. So in terms of the principles, there are some key principles of the policy that I wish to just go through. I do know there's been quite considerable concern by local residents, set out by the petition, set out by Helen Grant MP, in terms of the concern that residents have regarding the use of Forstall Lane. But again, as I said, I have to draw back to the requirements of the policy. And I'll just point out to members that the policy, in terms of point 4, specifically says access will be taken from Forstall Lane only. And I would add that this document has taken a number of years to get to fruition through a Reg 18, through a Reg 19, through many assessments of the local plan. It has been reviewed by the planning inspector, and I myself and the highways officer here sat in that examination that examined this particular access point. The inspector found this allocation and its access to be sound on that basis, and he took into account all the policy issues that were set out in that policy. So the applicant has followed the requirements of this emerging local plan to the full extent and has carried out his access requirements along Forstall Lane. I can understand the concerns raised by residents, but highways have reviewed that. It's been safety audited, and it has been concluded that that is safe, is a safe access point and is acceptable, and likewise so did the local plan inspector conclude that. I would also just point out in terms of point 3, which there has been issues raised about a linking through the Willow Grange site and how that could be accommodated. Obviously, I would obviously say that's not in the policy, but I would also point to what the actual policy requirement says, which says the hedgerow along the southern boundary, which is that boundary, of the site will be retained to form a natural break between housing allocations. So there was a clear intention when the policy was drafted that there wouldn't be a connection between those housing allocations, and that is why the policy says very clearly that the access should be from Forstall Lane only. When we go through a local plan, Kent Highways review all our housing allocations and provide comment both on the Reg 18, Reg 19, and that is the whole point, so we can have a concise document and it also goes through members. So I think I'll finish. In terms of the other matters, the ecological matters on the site are considered that they are acceptable. You're obviously not considering landscaping at this stage. I have previously said, in terms of the open space, This is an indicative parameters plan. If members conclude that they wish to have an open space in a particular area, then my advice is members should be securing that at this stage. There is a condition suggested which secures 1.85 hectares of open space, but it doesn't actually specify. The applicants, in my view, are proposing to use this because they've put some of the ecological measures within this site and they've built certain things in this particular area which would mean, in my view, that this would come forward in any case. But if members want that certainty, then they could condition that on that point. Likewise, I've raised the issue with the heights as well. This is the planning permission stage. If members want to control those elements, this is the time to control this application. Likewise, as I said, you're not considering and design at this stage, but again, you know, that should come forward at a reserved matter stage, but again, members have the ability to sort of control those elements. So I think my conclusion is that all other matters have been considered. They are considered acceptable. They're set out in the report. Members are only considering access at this stage, which is considered safe and an acceptable means to access this site. I would just point out, and I know in terms of this will come up in the discussion tonight, there is obviously a ransom strip across this area round the bottom. Now, it will come up in a discussion, invariably, in terms of some members and members of the public suggesting that maybe you could secure an access through here. What I need to implore to members is you are considering an access along Forstall Lane. That's what's in the policy, and that is what's up for consideration. We could not force an applicant, where there is a ransom strip down there and there is a policy issue, to look at an alternative access point, because they have put an application forward which needs to consider the application along Forstall Lane. I've got nothing further to add, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
The legal officer does have some things to add.
In addition to the unseen urgent update, 3 further points for members. In relation to the financial contribution of £30.79 per dwelling to community learning, delegated authority to the head of planning to provide a fuller SIL compliant description. The financial contribution of £8.49 for youth services, again delegated authority to the head of planning to provide a full SIL compliant description. And delegated authority to the head of planning to insert the informatives which have been requested and are currently not showing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, I'm now going to ask the legal officers to continue and outline how the public speaking session this evening will operate.
Thank you, Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a short announcement for members of the public and in particular those who are speaking on an item this evening. As you've just heard, the item is announced by the Chairman and then the planning officer introduces the item. This is the stage we are at now, and the Chair will then call the speakers. When you hear your name called, please could you come forward to the table there and take a seat. To speak, press the middle button down on the device. You do not need to hold it down, just press it once. The button will turn green and the ring around the mouthpiece on the microphone will turn red. You will have 3 minutes to speak. I have a timer here on the computer in front of me, and unfortunately it's not being projected, so either I or the Chair will call out when your time is up. At the end of that time, please wrap up your sentence quickly. Once you've finished speaking, please press the middle button again. The microphone will turn white, and then return to your seat. Visiting members? You may hear some of the speakers referred to as visiting members. They are members of the Council, but they don't sit on this committee. They will have 3 minutes to speak, but they do not have the right to vote on any of the applications.
Thank you. Right, our first speaker this evening probably didn't actually need that introduction because he's been here a few times. Mr. Hawkins for the petitioner.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. I find myself in a slightly unusual position this evening, insofar as I'm seeking to gain members' agreement to deviate from policy on a recently allocated housing site. This isn't to disagree with the principle, but rather to confirm to members that the main issue of contention, and indeed the issue raised within the petition with regard to the access, we believe can be addressed with the provision of an access through the recently approved and delivered countryside development, the land to the south. It's fully understood that the policy requires for the access to come out onto Forstall Lane, and this was brought about so the allocation was not reliant upon third-party land, i.e. it wasn't facilitated by other developments, so it could come forward by itself. This is why we have the policy requirements as we do. Nevertheless, the routing of traffic down Forstall Lane, which to my mind at present has a strong rural character, and into the village centre, when it's anticipated the majority of the traffic will head into Maidstone, seems rather counterintuitive. Also, given the level of works that the applicant will be required to undertake along Forstall Lane, including the provision of a footpath, we believe that the rerouting this would have significant environmental benefits, as well as discouraging rat running through the unsuitable rural lanes towards Tovel and Lewes. And we're also mindful, obviously, that the Council are seeking contributions towards the Linton Crossroads to that regard. As I say, we therefore propose that the scheme be routed through the land to the front of the site and out onto Heath Road. The scheme that Countryside have brought forward has been designed in such a way to accommodate the traffic from this development. Clearly, however, and this is something that officers have picked up on, any rerouting of the development through the land needs to be economically viable or even preferable to the applicant or developer. While these situations often result in the ransom of land, I can confirm that in this instance the landowner is willing to be pragmatic, both in terms of viability and economic impact, and also with regards to the speed in which the application could be turned around should members seek to defer the application. To repeat, this wouldn't lead to a ransoming situation. As set out within the lobbying documentation, we appreciate that members may not feel comfortable and may not be able to refuse this application on the basis of an inappropriate access. We're not suggesting that you should. All we are looking to do is to seek a deferral so that this can be explored further, which we believe will be to the betterment of the scheme as a whole. And therefore we hope you can support such a deferral. Finally, should members be minded to grant planning permission tonight, I do have one rather specific request which has come to me, which is that if members are minded to approve, could I ask that an informative or indeed a condition be placed upon any permission that keeps a level access to number 30 Forstall Lane provided at all times during works, as the two occupiers, Mr and Mrs James, both have cerebral palsy, and it's necessary for Mrs James to use wheelchair when outside. The provision of works here without level access would therefore be detrimental to their lives. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr Hawkins. That was to the point. Now, Councillor Duval, Coxheath Parish Council, please.
Okay, right. Mr Chairman, planning application 17/502072/OUT, site H160 Forstall Lane, Coxheath. Statement on behalf of Coxheath Parish Council. From the outset, Coxheath Parish Council has been implacably opposed to this planning application and all excessives, not as policy dictates, that has limited development of any larger village. The site is not included in the draft Coxheath Neighbourhood Plan, which was submitted to the Borough Council in January 2014, and nothing has happened in the intervening period to alter the Parish Council's view. The fact that the site is included in the emerging Maidstone local plan does not make the proposal sound sustainable or acceptability in the eyes of the local community. Over 600 residents have signed a petition against the application. Many hundreds of residents also attend an exhibition mounted by the developer earlier in the year, and a huge majority were against the proposals. Coxheath Parish Council is disgusted by the stance apparently taken by Kent County Council Highways, who failed to point out that the severe limitations of local roads to cope with the anticipated level of additional traffic emanating from the site. Furthermore, this application has attracted around 300 letters of objection from concerned residents. At the planning inspectors and examination session last year for the draft local plan, assurances were given by Maidstone Borough Council planning officers that the concerns over the wholly inappropriate access from Forster Lane to this development site would have to be addressed by any potential developer. On examining the plans set out of this application, clearly nothing of the sort has been addressed. If access is approved via Forster Lane, traffic will have the following options: to travel east and then north via Wells Street and Lewes Village. Most of Wells Street is single file traffic and totally unsuitable. To travel west and access the Heath Road through the existing estate via Mill Lane, where the roads are already at capacity. To travel west and access the Heath Road by turning south at the junction with Stockett Lane. This would take travel past the primary school, the preschool, along the road, which is often effectively one lane. Because of parked
I'm
vehicles...
sorry, Councillor, that's time.
I've run out of time.
I'm sorry, that's 3 minutes. In fact, it's a bit over 3 minutes, so I'll let you go on a little further. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Dr Parry from Lewes Parish Council, please.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name's David Parry, and I live at the top of Wells Street in Lewes. In fact, I've seen my house several times this evening. And I'm representing Lewes Parish Council, and I'm also a member of the Hands Off Coxheath campaign. Now, you've heard all the arguments against this proposal, and I do think that they are substantial. But on a positive note, I'd like to think that you, our democratically elected councillors, can really show how local democracy actually works. You've heard already the petition over 600 signatures against this proposal, alongside the 300 objections on the website. And look at the response behind me as well. All from a relatively small community. I mean, isn't this a crystal clear message to you just to stop this happening? So let's do a brief cost-benefit analysis on this proposal. Who benefits? Who benefits? Sorry. First of all, the landowners, to the tune of several millions, who may or may not be your constituents. Secondly, London-based property developers, again to the tune of several millions, who are definitely not your constituents. And finally, a national building contractor, yet to be decided, who will also make millions out of this, and unlikely to be your constituents. So what about the costs? If those are the benefits, what about the costs? We've heard considerable environmental costs, lots more traffic, and I wonder if you've actually been down Wells Street, any of you. I live on the top of Wells Street. It's a medieval track, and I'm not exaggerating. I can touch both sides, the vegetation, with my arms standing in the middle. That's how wide Wells Street is. And there's lots of costs in terms of health, safety, loss of green space, wildlife, increased flooding. We haven't heard about that. Increased flooding. We've experienced that ourselves. And what about the loss of quality of life for existing citizens? Can't get around easily, can't park, can't get access to doctors, dentists, schools. And I'm not sure that MBC and KCC have really fully costed the infrastructure requirements of this proposal. You're going to have to pick up a big bill here, I reckon, short, medium and long term, and it's unlikely met by any Section 106 contribution. So for me, in summary, the costs do far outweigh the benefits. I can't see any case for this. And Coxheath has borne more than its fair share of development, hasn't it, really? Recently we've heard about Willow Grange, which is not quite finished, Linden Farm, Caravan Park, and I understand there are more in the pipeline for Coxheath. I mean, this is a major new development. This is the biggest that Coxheath has ever seen in the history of the village. It doesn't represent what your citizens actually want, and it will dramatically affect their lives, and it will cost dear. So I do urge you to represent the views of your constituents in this and reject this application. So keep the Heath in Coxheath. Thank you for your attention.
Right, exactly on time. Right. Right. The next time there's any applause, this meeting will be cleared and the public evicted. We are not having that. We are not having that. There will be no clapping, no applause, no booing. Understand me? And especially no booing, because now we're about to hear from the applicant. Mr. Burton Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Committee. This site, and so by association, this planning application, is important to this Council for two obvious reasons. The first, no more obvious than the fact that the site is proposed for housing in the new local plan going before the full Council in just 13 days' time. As such, swift delivery of the site is fundamental to maintaining a 5-year housing land supply. The local plan makes clear the contingent basis upon which the site is allocated, namely to deliver sustainable growth to meet identified housing need and to mitigate against the risks of delivery through a strategy focused on dispersal of readily available sites not hampered by issues of viability. To this end, my client is targeting a submission of a reserve matters application early in the new year with the intention of clearing conditions and making a start on site by the autumn. Secondly, the application guarantees the final source of funding for the Linton Crossroad improvements, without which the likelihood of the improvement works proceeding is drastically reduced. The committee's task tonight is simple. You have an application that is submitted that is in complete accordance with the sound policy provisions of the new local plan, which once adopted will comprise part of the statutory development plan, where proposals that accord with the development plan should be approved without delay. I accept that the proposed access arrangements have been met by a number of local objections. All the same, this application is policy compliant, raises no technical objections from Maidstone or Kent, and results in reduced ecological impact than the alternative. I urge the committee not to be taken in by the emotive arguments that you have heard from the objectors and are about to hear probably from the ward members, for there are no sound or clear-cut planning objections to deny a grant of planning permission. Any consideration to do so would not be within the interests of the wider public, given the core planning benefits that are secured by this planning application, namely 40% affordable housing on site, 1.5 hectares of public open space with ecological enhancements along the eastern boundary, and improvements to the surface of the footway, the public right-of-way running through their space. Also, a resolution to existing flooding on Forstall Lane, as the on-site retention pond would intercept water that is currently ponding in the corner of Well Street and Forstall Lane, combined with the fact that Forstall Lane would undergo full reconstruction to adoptable standards with a drainage system, and finally, a full package of Section 106 contributions. It is pertinent, given the strength of the objections to the access, to stress that this case was made most recently through the to stress to you that the alternative access was most recently put to the local plan inspector during his examination, and he found that such consideration was not worthy of a proposed modification, satisfying himself that Forstall Lane provided a safe and suitable access. I'd just quite quickly like to pick up on
No, I'm afraid not quite quickly. That's 3 minutes.
Okay.
And next time, Mr. Burton Taylor, please don't insult members of the council.
Apologies.
Councillor Mortimer.
Right, thank you, Chairman. Members, you must bear in mind that we still have a draft local plan and that plan is not adopted yet. So, we've still got old policies like EMV 28 that's very, very important for development in the countryside, and a development that will affect not only country lanes, will affect the conservation area of Lewes. Now, let me start on, it's on highways, and I'm sorry I'm speaking quick, I have 3 minutes. In the report, the Kent County Council say you will go out the site and you'll turn left. You won't go down Wells Street because they put a little sign up saying, we don't want you to go down there. Now, that won't be enforceable. And first of all, when you get stuck in a traffic jam, you're going to turn around, you're going to go down Wells Street. Absolute nonsense from the highways. And it's absolute madness to think you can go out into Forstall Lane, and this is the words in your report, they will turn left, they'll go along Forstall Lane till they get to Stockett Lane, they'll turn left. Bear in mind they haven't mentioned anything about turning right, but you'll turn left, you're going to the centre of the village, you'll then turn left again. Now, what I need to tell you is that Councillor Webb and the Parish Council had a meeting with Kent Highways. Hey, and when they left that meeting on site, where did they go? Up Mill Lane, through the estate, exactly where Kent Highways are saying they will not go. And I believe that for the few words you got from Kent Highways and this massive document from DHA, you can refuse it on highway grounds. I really believe you can. But if you, and I don't miss to be disrespectful, if you're not bold enough to do that, then it needs to be deferred, because you cannot have the traffic go through the estate, which is exactly where the highways officer went, and they said they won't go. You have to bear that in mind, because that's what will happen. Also, Chairman, I'd like to touch on 106. If anything goes through, I'd like a 106 for a subsidy towards a late-night bus service, which I asked for in the past, but that's not in the document. And I'd like to just finish on one thing. You just told the gentleman off having a go at councillors. When I had a meeting with his department, along with Dave Hickins and Councillor Webb, he said, you councillors, you're a law unto yourself. So I'll leave that with you, and I apologise if I'm out of order for saying that, Chairman. So I can only leave it in your capable hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mortimer. Yes, I would like both sides of the argument to be civil and to stick to the planning arguments and highways arguments rather than who said what to whom. Councillor Webb, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. Tonight we're hearing a lot about the traffic problems concerned with this site. And of the 5 sites from the emerging local plan for Coxheath, this is the site the hardest to access from the road network, tucked down a quiet country lane, yet it is the one that has taken the most housing allocation. In the report in front of you, there are certain points that I would like to refer to. Item 6.15 states that the traffic assessment estimates 36% of cars will travel north along Stockett Lane towards Maidstone. That means that at the considered AM peak, 34 extra cars will go down Stockett Lane, which is another narrow country lane towards Tovell. But there's no mention of this part of the road network in any correspondence from Kent Highways, or what the effect will be on the Farley Hill junction in Tovell. Item 6.3 talks about the badgers that are on site, claiming the developer has taken measures to ensure a new artificial set has been built for the badgers to move into. Yet, when I was on the site yesterday, there is evidence of a natural set having been dug by the badgers at the bottom of the valley, just below this artificial set, rather calling into question how successful these efforts to control where the badgers have been. This item finishes by saying the existing set on the southern boundary will be temporarily closed during construction and will be reopened on completion of construction to allow badgers to reuse the set if required. Well, if required, are there going to be any badgers left? After all, the construction work that has been going on will there be